Blah, blah, blah.
That'd be amazing.
I don't know if this is going to be today.
That's your tool. It's the tools of the trade.
It's like my pointer for today when I'm making my point.
That's actually your MFA graduation diploma.
I'm in my gardening clothes today. In honor of this subject.
Yes, I know that Deuce won the 2022 Pulitzer Prize for Poetry, but this is not only not a sonnet, it is not any kind of poetry at all. It is prose. Who gets to define poetry? I've never understood the need some people have to make barbed gripes about aesthetic differences. Perhaps you can study more closely and learn from this prize-winning poet. They are welcome to reshape old forms. Bravo! But why call it by the old name? On closer inspection, this appears to have line breaks. Iambic pentameter. Big whoop. You sound like Whitman's stuffy critics railing against free verse. For the record, you're being a real cunt about this. Fuck off.
It made me for a while worried for our dear beloved sonnet form. I don't know. I got scared. I mean, if there is no sonnet anymore, if anything can be a sonnet, then what happens next?
What do we call that form that was traditionally known, the form formerly known as sonnet?
Well, I think that's the formerly known. The problem is that everyone's calling the sonnet a sonnet, but the poor OG of sonnet.
It makes me laugh, and the one person who said it wasn't a sonnet had a kind of a point about why can't we name it something new? Or I'm like, don't name anything. Let's just run wild with stuff and see what happens. I think people just have a very strong knee-jerk reaction to anything that says something isn't. Like you don't get to like say something isn't anymore. You don't get to say it isn't good. You don't get to say it isn't a sonnet. And I don't even think she was, well, okay, so the original person's tweet, I forget whatever her name was like, she didn't think it was a poem at all. Like, she was like, it's prose. And I don't agree with that. I didn't agree with that part, and I didn't study it close enough to even weigh in on whether I thought it was a sonnet. But I'm always way more interested in not the discourse, but the reaction to the discourse.
Yeah.
And people just like utterly melting down, because like the most vulnerable population, of course, in the lit world is Pulitzer Prize winners. We need to rush to our defense. Fucking go there. Defend this Pulitzer Prize winner. Like they're just so on the edge of just quitting. Like, it just seems so bizarre to me that like we have all these conversations about hierarchies of power and kind of dismantling power structures. And in the lit world, the powerful, I would say, are the people that are like well known, well awarded, well prized, and we just love to we got their back so hard.
Oh,
I have never seen people rush to destroy no name person. Not saying that she doesn't have a name or that she isn't known in her own spheres. I don't know, but just that, wow, we will crush anybody who gets in the way of our beloved prize winners.
Even if you look at the progression from the Italian sonnet and how it goes from not just how it's changed in forms, but it's changed in languages and all the adaptations that go with it. It's complicated, but I like when people bring this up, because I think it's part of the way we operate just in general, that we're always reshaping and readapting to the world as it changes around us. And
it is an interesting conversation to have, like all those spaces between like, oh, poetry used to be rhymed and metered, and then there was blank verse, and then there's free verse, and it's like every step where it evolves, there's always a group that's like, what is happening? This is nonsense. Like, you can't, that's not poetry. It's the whatever. There was a really interesting conversation when it came to like bodies, like the idea of beauty in different body shapes and things like that. And they talked about body currency. Like, there's a certain currency that held a lot of like clout, and then when the idea of beauty changed, those people that held that currency no longer had the same quote unquote value and then felt threatened and then attacked these different standards of beauty. And so it's the same type of thing, right? Where you have these different standards and different currencies of what is poetry, what isn't poetry, what is a sonnet, what, you know, and so it's just, I love those conversations. Like what makes a prose poem versus flash fiction versus, I mean, it's such a great, rich area of discussion.
Someone had mentioned, like called it radical subjectivity or whatever, the way people, you know, they're always going to push and push, push on what we in the like, you know, I don't know, in the contemporary era view as subjectivity. So that is always going to change. You know, what is subjective is subject, you know, to change. It's not, it's, you know, and so that is something people have to adapt to. It's not as radical as it may seem, I think, on its face, but it can seem a little absurd. Like to say, for instance, that, you know, I am looking at this bag of dirt, you know, we are talking about dirt today, but that comments of that a bag of dirt can be a poem, and that no one should be able to argue any different, you know, and that's debatable.
That is debatable. And I've actually brought a poem of my own today. So if you
I brought your bio.
I've got to pull up the tweet real quick so I can honor it properly. Because oh man, I have to type out this the Kaveh quote on this document.
Is that really how you pronounce his name? Kaveh?
Yeah, I think it's like I think he had said before in an interview, like back when he did the Dive Dapper, when he was just kind of more of a fanboy than a star. It was like Kaveh rhymes with Java. Oh, so I think it's Kaveh.
I had no. That's going to take a lot of undoing in my brain because he's been Kaveh to me forever.
Yeah. Oops. Yeah, Kaveh seems more hilarious and on brand for whatever reason to me. Kaveh.
I know. I don't know. I just.
I'm gonna think like
that's what it looked like. How it sounded. Okay, so
it's like Kaveh Maria,
like, or like Spoil and Soul.
Like it'd be so good. Like that's my Christmas song. That's my holiday song now. For those that don't know, let's read this tweet from the now deleted Kaveh Akbar's Twitter account, back when it was known as Twitter. There's this quote: "If someone hands me a bag of dirt and tells me it's a poem, it gets to be a poem. It might not be a poem that satisfies me intellectually or brings me any delight. I may not want to spend much time with it, but it's a poem because the person who built it called it a poem." And that is, you know, that's, I guess, radical subjectivity, if you want to call it that. It's, or radical acceptance or radical inclusion, whatever radical term you want to say. I have thoughts on bags of dirt that don't involve it necessarily being a poem just because someone calls it a poem. I think, I guess, how far away do we want to go from language before a poem becomes not a poem is kind of the big question, right? Like I look at like poems that use like erasures or strike throughs and creating, or collage poetry, creating all these different kind of things, or mixing images, like kind of hybrid text, all this stuff. And I feel like the basis is always language. Is always like language in juxtaposition to something else, whether it's in juxtaposition to white space or silence or whatever it is, that has to be based in language or steeped in language somehow. And I'm not sure if a bag of dirt constitutes that for me. So I think that's a little too outside the realms of what I consider poetry. Like there's pushing the form and then just completely ignoring everything in it. And that's what bag of dirt does. It just ignores not just one history, but literally the all of history. Like even the oral tradition part of like, I don't know, man. It just boggles my mind. I don't understand why academics have to take it seriously so much. It's so bizarre to me.
Well, it's because Java, like Java, if it's a beloved and they say it, then it's scripture. I always assumed that this comment, you know, which is sort of kind of it took off, which is funny because it, people still talk about it. I wrote a poem about it. Like other people have written poems about it. And like this idea of poetry, like that I can call this poem or this bag of dirt a poem. I feel like it has roots. It has to have roots in like modernist thought of like no
Roots.
ideas, no ideas, but in things and show don't
Mhm,
tell. But in, like you said, if you strip out the language component, which obviously is the big one, and the art of the craft, of how we
mhm,
manipulate these things, whether it is a little bit of the concrete, a little bit of the abstract, we're manipulating something to in with language, creating
mhm.
something out of a languageless space. Let's take the theory for a test drive. Michael Schmeltzer.
Just bag of dirt. Which, you know, arguably many people out there probably consider that fairly accurate. It's one of those tweets I like to think about, and then as soon as I try to put any of it in practice, I feel like it just falls apart. Like I don't know how to apply that, I guess. If anyone has any great ideas on how to apply a bag of dirt as a bag of verse, let us know. And now that I got my bio of dirt, which is very exciting, let me introduce you to co-host, co-founder of Table for Deuce, Kate Hanson Foster, author of Crow Funeral and previously of Midriff. And Kate, also a bag of dirt because I'm a plagiarist. I'm just gonna run with that now.
What?
Kate also.
Wow, this is getting
But
complicated.
I did pour it differently than you probably. So does it make it different?
Well, I
How
don't
can we judge a bag of dirt?
mine's organic. So that can feel morally superior. It's like anything else when we push these boundaries. It's fun to push them. I think it sparks debate, which is always good. At the end of the day, I do think a little bit of reason needs to be involved, that you can't just go so far down, that path of obscurity.
I agree. It is, but it is fun to think about. It's fun to push a little bit, push the envelope. And I want to get right into this poem of ours. The bag of dirt is a great transition because I started researching dirt in poetry, like how people are writing about dirt and soil and earth.
As one.
And as one does.
Mhm.
And I came across a poem by a poet I have not read before. And I'm not even sure if this is from a book or from a publication. It was posted on someone had tweeted it, I think, and there was on a blog post. So, but the poem I want to talk about for our toaster roast today is Soil by Irène Mathieu. The way you say soil sounds like soul, as in after we walked through the woods, my feet were covered in soul. When it rains, the soul turns to mud. The soul is made of decomposed plant and animal matter. Edaphology is the study of the soul's influence on living things, while pedology is the study of how soul is formed, its particular granularity. You are rooted in a certain red patch of soul that bled you and your 100 cousins to life, a slow, warm river you call home. Maybe there is soul under everything, even when we strike rock first. The way you say soil, you make a poem out of every speck of dirt. So that was Soil by Irène Mathieu, and I hope I'm pronouncing the name correctly there. But one of the things that strikes me right away is just the language itself. A lot of the poems I enjoy that are like of this kind of nature. There's a certain kind of like a mishearing, let's say, that can happen between soil and soul. And there are a lot of poets that kind of play with sound and words in a poem. And I think this is done very effectively. And despite the amount of repetition in the word soul, I thought it managed that really well. I mean, there are what, like 8 or 9 references to soul when you know the intention is soil, and you get that kind of mix. And most of the time, this poem is doing a lot of things that I don't tend to steer towards, that kind of playful, clever mishearing, that amount of repetition. But I just think it carried it really well. I think the poet managed to pace it out and use language in an interesting way, used new language that I hadn't really thought of before, as far as like the etymology and pedology and the different ways of kind of talking about the earth and dirt and things like that. I just thought it was well done in that sense. And we had talked about love poems previously, and I know that the author talked about this being kind of a tribute to her partner's accent. I believe the partner is from somewhere in Virginia. So you could kind of, you hear where that's coming from, and you kind of understand that sense of it, that kind of ode to the accent there. And I just really enjoy a lot of what they're doing with the sound.
You know, accents and how we all change, whether it be socially or geographically, how, you know, our intonations or dialect change or vary. You know, it's how we color the language that we speak. Like, we put our own color on it, I guess you could say. And you know, it's um I don't know, it got me thinking, like, what if we all sounded like robots? Like, you know, like that, you don't realize how humanizing accents are, because what if that was part of our physiology, that we were just we all spoke like robots, and there was nothing to color language, to show and kind of build a story of ourselves in that way. And the playfulness of the wordplay, obviously, which is the driving force here. I think it goes to what we were just talking about, which is that, you know, we're talking about a concrete, basic thing like dirt, you know, and then a more abstract concept of what it means to have a soul, and how you can, just in the slightest interchange of those words, create all these crazy abstract and deeper meanings in the poem. The soul is made of decomposed plant and animal matter. You know, it's like, to just think of that as it sounds, you know, as a soul. I mean, this just shows a great example of craft as well, you know, that by mingling these two abstract and concrete ideas and images, you end up with something so much more profound and with so many different ways of interpretation. It's really cool. This is a cool poem. I'm glad you found it.
If we're looking at this from a love poem perspective, and the kind of impetus behind the poem, and this being something dedicated to accent, I think that makes it so touching in a way that isn't like corny or anything like that. It's a very, I think, romantic way to pay tribute to someone, that you pay such close attention to their language and how they speak, that you are able to write something like this and focus on just the sound of one word that they say and create something so beautiful and so interesting. And I was trying to think the amount of repetition and why that works for me. And it got me thinking about the poetic form of the ghazal.
Yeah.
Then you have those repeated words at the end of the lines in that kind of couplet form, I believe. And this does almost a very similar thing. The poem kind of has that feel to me, where it's like this word is being repeated and it comes in almost like on every couplet, I believe. If not every couplet, let me just take a quick glance. But yeah, and so it just has that, it's coming and it repeats and it just kind of builds, and it somehow manages not to be repetitious in the way that a poem can often just, I mean, there are times when even just one repeated phrase in a poem this length seems overdone. Yeah. And here we have a person using the word over and over in pretty interesting ways. And it's not, and if you replace soul with soil, they would be kind of like really basic ideas, basic lines, which is so fascinating to me. I mean, there's nothing really dynamic if it was the word soil in place of all these other things.
When I printed out the poem off the internet, it stripped away like all the explanations and the dedication or whatever that was written, I think, in the blog, like you said. So here's like the part where in our discussion where I always kind of nitpick on context.
Yeah.
I love that we have that little bit of information that isn't given in the poem, but we found out on the internet, which is that it's sort of like an ode to a partner's Southern accent. I wonder if that would, if I didn't know that going in, having read that, if it would change anything. There's nothing to specify whether this is a Southern accent or any, I mean, or even an accent at all. I mean, so there's all sorts of things you could, I guess, infer from that, because it's playful in the way that it's like kind of the way you say soil sounds like soul. So if I didn't go into it with that knowledge that like this was, this was sort of like my little love poem to my partner with a, adorable accent. I don't know if it would start off with those feelings that, I get right away. Because obviously in my head, I was hearing, soul, soul off your boots. That's
where every episode you just have some kind of bizarre voice accent thing that happens.
Why am I like this? But yeah, so there was that. I'm just pointing out these are super, I mean, maybe they're not as nitpicky, but I think that it's nitpicky, but I do wonder about the context there. If you're, because you've said it more than once, you feel like this is a love poem, you feel like it's an ode, so kind of to an accent and everything. Would you feel that way if you didn't know?
Yeah, I wouldn't know necessarily what kind of love poem it would be. I think the only two things that really give hint are like, I mean, this could be, as far as I know, to like a parent, if you wanted to call it that. I mean, it
like a
could be that
poem or something.
Yeah, it could be any of that. I mean, the way you say soil, so there's a relationship there that's close enough to kind of pay attention to. And the last couplet, the way you say soil, you make a poem out of every speck of dirt. I mean, that isn't something that you would say to enemy or someone that's a neutral party. I mean, this is a very loving, very kind of devoted way of speaking about someone, or an elevated way of like seeing them. And I think there's kind of that more epic language. Like, I mean, the line, you are rooted in a certain red patch of soul that bled you and your 100 cousins to life. I mean, that is like, almost, it sounds mythological, like the origins of this kind of person or these cousins and all that. It seems much more than just neutral or whatnot. I mean, there's, like I said, there seems to be a very loving relationship here. So I couldn't necessarily place it as romantic if I didn't know kind of the context of why the author wrote the poem or what they were thinking about when they wrote it. But I would definitely get the sense that it is a love poem, not necessarily a romantic love poem, but a love poem nonetheless towards someone.
Feels like one of those poems that when we read it, we realize that it may work really well contextualized within like a collection that's maybe, that perhaps there are sort of other poems that build a story. So there's that. But yeah, I loved the line, the one that you were just mentioning. You are rooted in a certain red patch of soul that bled you and your 100 cousins to life. I mean, that I had to read and reread and read and reread. It's like, this is such a fascinating line. I'm thinking that it's possibly referencing like kind of just our human histories in a specific place, and how we continue to like thrive in one particular physical space on Earth. I felt that like the power of that line got a little taken away with the following line, which a slow, warm river you call home. It seemed a little weak sauce to me. and also a little bit of a different image, because it's like, are we talking about dirt or are we talking about water? I mean, these are like,
Hmm.
they're two important things, but they're also two very
Yeah.
distinct things. So that was just a little bit of a kind of, I felt like if I were striking, if I were
Yeah.
given the power to strike live, I think I would take that one away.
I could definitely see that. I think a lot of the references to soul slash soil here, like I think it works when it says when it rains, the soul turns to mud. I love that one. I think there's something that I mean, and maybe it's because I'm here in Washington where everything has just been so muddy, but like I can feel that like in my bones, this like that wetness and that mud and that kind of like struggle. So there's a lot that implies for me, and not just because like I'm here and here getting rained on, but that kind of that internal struggle of like just existence and how sometimes yeah it can feel like your soul is mud.
Right.
And I love that kind of thing. And the other part where it's like maybe there is soul under everything even when we strike rock first, that really works for me as well. But like you said, that when it comes to the river part, I think that's the only thing that does cause a little bit of a pause for me too, because it's like you have these kind of competing things or things that are in conflict. And when it's the rain and soul and that makes mud, there's a certain kind of tension there that works for me. But when it's a red patch of soul that bled you and your 100 cousins to light, I mean, that is a great, powerful line. And mentally for me, it does place me in certain regions. It feels like I don't see red dirt here.
Right.
And I just, that is very much feels like a place, a very specific place, maybe one that I don't know, but at least I know that this author feels like they're very specifically thinking of some place.
Yeah.
And then the slow, warm river you call home just does not work for me as much. Like there, even if it's slow, it just doesn't. It seems like too much movement for what is happening. Soil doesn't seem, in this poem at least, not quite the same kind of movement as I imagine in a river. So that there's a little bit of a kind of a miss there for me too. So I totally get where you're coming from. Oh, and I did quick research. This is from a book, I believe. So Irène Mathieu does have a book, and I don't quite know how to pronounce the title of the book. Orogeny. It's the process in which a section of Earth's crust is folded and deformed by lateral compression to form a mountain range. So I think I imagine this book, I mean, just based on this one poem in the title, I mean, there's this idea of earth and movement and dirt and soil. And I'm like, this is fantastic. Like I'm very kind of interested in this person and their background and what they're thinking about and how they think about things. It's very interesting to me. So
Absolutely. Certainly intriguing. I'd buy the book for sure. I I do like the way that line that you said, like the maybe there is soul under everything, even when we strike rock first. Just the layers of metaphors working here, of just kind of like, even if you kind of hit that hard surface with somebody, eventually there's soul there, that there's soul under everything. This is totally a Kate thing, and it's nitpicky, and it's not, and I can't say I'm always consistent with my opinion here. But
mhm,
I kind of I don't really love it when, like, poems point to themselves, like, when,
mm,
like, just the last line of, like, "You make a poem out of every speck of dirt." And again, there's this double meaning. That's exactly what the poet is doing here. The last line's nice, right? It's nice, and it's
yeah,
that nice bow that I
yep,
think is, it just kind of ties it all up, looks
mhm,
good, sends off, and there's nothing wrong with it. But
mhm,
it almost just seemed just a tad too easy.
yeah,
And so I kind of thought maybe, not that I know or would suggest any different word other than poem, but you know, just that kind of like, you make a poem out of every speck of dirt. I don't know. I
Mhm.
always want a different word. Just I don't know what, but
Mhm.
something where it's not pointing to itself. And I almost feel like it could just have done something a little bit more surprising. But it's a Kate thing. It's a nitpicky thing.
No.
And
Oh, yeah, it's nitpicky, but I wouldn't say it's wrong. It is a very neat ending. It is clean. It is, like you said, it is tied up nicely. It is the ending that you get to when you think, oh, I have this good ending. It's not the ending that makes you think, holy shit, I'm gonna blow their minds with this. It's the ending that you get to when you're done. It's not the ending that you get to
it's
when
sort
you
of
make
just
your
valid.
final edits and push it.
Exactly. It's like it's basically saying the same thing and like, and that is why, like, in its
Mhm.
conclusion, it's
Yeah.
just it's a very like, just put the stamp on it, like the wax seal, and
Hmm.
put it in the mail. It just
Yeah.
you're right. I mean, it's not, there wasn't something like that, fall on the floor amazing about the last line. It was pretty predictable, but I don't know if that's terrible. I don't know if that's a bad
Yeah.
thing. All poems need, if we could all do that with every poem, then, we'd all be geniuses. It's hard to.
Yeah. It is, and it's one of those poems where it's like I see the criticism of that last line, and I know I can pretty much guarantee there is a more surprising or challenging ending that you could have said with this. Even just changing that word poem, like you said. Do I still like the ending? Sure. Like, and it's one of those where it's like it's not one that left me with a bad taste when I got to the end of it. It wasn't like that. But like you said, it isn't one that it isn't a last line that I'm always gonna like. It's not gonna stick in my head. It's a clean, neat ending, and it ended the poem just fine. It was, not. It's not the best line in the poem. It's not the worst line in the poem. It's just right smack dab in the good category, and some people are gonna love that. Some people want that nice, clean ending to a poem where it feels like you read a poem. It leaves you with that feeling like, that's the end. And some people want a little more fuzziness or complications or surprise or a little more of a aha moment. And it's like a little a aha, not capital A aha moment for me, this ending.
The whisper, aha. Yeah. I you talked a lot about the repetition, and I think this is such a useful tool that's being used. Kind of like when I was reading all of this stuff about the sonnets and the what is a sonnet and what isn't a sonnet, and does
Mhm.
this have the loose components of a sonnet? And one of the things um that people were discussing about the poem in question, that either was a sonnet or a sonnet, or whatever, how they did it. But so was the whether or not they've argued the poem had a volta, which is,
Mhm.
it's been a while since I've been scanning all my terms, but that's kind of like a turn in the poem, right? Like a little bit of
Mhm.
a change, almost like a bridge in a song. That little element of change, a shift, whether it's in mood or a shift in an idea. It's it takes you out of a mental pattern that what
Mhm.
repetition sort of does when you are utilizing it for that purpose and receiving it as a reader. It puts you in these weird patterns, and then also in this, because we're talking about sound, like we're in this kind of pattern and we're in this soundscape
Mhm.
of playing with language and sounds and everything. I think that it would have done well to take this poem from good to great if
Mhm.
took if it broke off a little bit somehow from that kind of pattern. And I'm not proposing anything, because I don't know if I don't think I personally could make this poem better, but
Mhm.
that's something to make that turn, so it's not just a rhetorical phrase at the end. It's something that kind
Mhm.
of like, if not so much a surprising, like, blow my mind line, even if it was
Mhm.
more of the context, like, we know that it is not exactly here, but was in the write-up on the blog that described this poem, just something more, something that gives us that little bit that's different.
The lines that are most powerful for me are the ones that have such like almost like tactile experience for me, like soul turns to mud or made of decomposed plant and animal matter. Like there's such a like kind of visceral, tactile, sensational quality to so much of these things. And then the last line, it's more of a decrescendo than a crescendo for me.
It's almost like I knew once the last line was there, I was just kind of like, yeah, it's kind of like, and there
Yeah.
it is. It's possible that to say something more might take away from a lot of these really cool tensions created between concrete and abstract and sound, and how it changes and can bend and sway how we view a certain situation, or it can bend and sway to change the actual meaning of a sentence just by changing, how the word sounds, is such a cool thing that, it is possible that to go too far to do like this banger ending might take away from all those, couplets that have all these things. And also, these using scientific terms. I mean, that is impressive. The pathology is the study of how soul is formed, its particular granularity. I mean, that is such a cool line when you think about it in terms of the abstract soul.
I think we're ready. I think we're ready to make an idea about this, or make a claim. So should we do the toast or roast on this bad boy, this puppy?
I think it's time. Yeah.
All right. So it's my poem. I will go first. And like I said, I like the repetition in this poem. Repetition is always such a fascinating thing, and it can go wrong so quickly, but I think this poem and this poet did such a fine job of balancing it and placing the word soul in such interesting contexts. Like you said, using scientific language, juxtaposed with soul, which is such an unscientific kind of thing to think about. And it just made this beautiful kind of pairing. And there's so much chemistry in the lines and between the lines. I really enjoyed this poem. A couple of things that I didn't really think about as far as kind of like capitalization or punctuation or any of that stuff. It didn't feel all that important to me. I don't think it really took away or added anything, and I'm sure I could come up with some kind of reason for why it's there or why it's not, but it doesn't really matter too much for me. It didn't affect my reading of it. The last line, even if just that word poem was switched out with something else, I feel like it could have been a little more impactful at the end. But even so, it didn't affect my reading enough of the whole thing before that, like there was no negative feeling. It didn't leave a bad taste in my mouth at all. So for me, this is a pretty rock solid toast. So I like the poem. I like the language. I like the sounds. I like the, even though you can't necessarily say if it's a romantic partner or not, I like just the overall kind of feeling within the poem and this kind of rootedness in place and person and accent. I thought it worked really well. So toast, kudos, Irène Mathieu, and your poem Soil.
Yeah, this was really good. I mean, we should mention that we had some contenders for our Soil poem today.
Yeah.
So, and it was very hard to choose. Ultimately, you made the choice, but I'm glad we chose this one, mostly I do think it just fits very well into that conversation of how, you have this concept of radical subjectivity. You could say something like a poem is a bag of dirt, but if you're not putting your own stamp on it with your craft, with your language, with your tools, poetic tools, and in this case, like, the repetition was one, and the playfulness of sound and these auditory components to life experience and within the poem itself. I mean, reading poems are one thing, reading poems aloud are a whole nother experience. And so it's a very fascinating concept to play with, experiment with. It's very, it does feel romantic, if interpreted as like between two partners or lovers or whatnot. And that's I think really nice, a really unique way to express your affection for somebody else, and kind of just something a little bit below the surface of things, of what we love about each other as humans and things like that. I kind of feel like I'm the person in the line that says, maybe there's soul under everything, even if we strike rock first. I feel like maybe on, my harping on the last line, or even that line about the warm river might have struck a little rock in my reading. But I think overall, it's such a cool poem. And so I am going to go ahead and toast it as well. I like this one.
Yeah, it's an intimate little poem.
Yeah.
And it's like that kind of witnessing of someone, I think, is such a beautiful thing. And I think that's so much of what writers should be striving for, whether to witness something horrible or witness something beautiful. I think it's, important that we document these things. And I love that this poet witnessed and documented something that they loved in such a unique way. I'm gonna need to get that book. That seems like a good book.
Same.
Oh.
Yeah, this was a good choice. I think out of our other contenders, this one, this was the one, poem.
This was the dirt poem.
Plus, I love when we do this and we find, we kind of stumble and discover people that we actually didn't know before. So that I like it for that as well.
Yeah, the other dirt poems, like everyone would have heard it. Yeah, everyone knows Sharon Olds.
Exactly.
It's fine. It's fine. It's a good poem too. But also Sharon Olds, I love the book The Father. Shout out to you. Hey, great poem, great book, all of that. Just random ass kissing in effect.
Thank God she's listening. Otherwise.
Thank God she is. She is. I'm going to text her right after the show. Everyone should just write what makes them most authentic to themselves.
And there's a place for our little Shakespearean sonnets, or something that is a sonnet.
And on that lovely notes, thank you. And if you have any ideas about which poem we should tackle, or what word should have been substituted at the end of the line we just discussed, should it have been I don't even know, a plant out of every speck of dirt, a bird, a dream, I don't know. Come up with some suggestions. Let's see what we can do with that line.
I would like sound. I would like to an auditory type word, I think, because it's so much about sound. But anyways, too late for that.
Oh, that would have been
too late for that talk. But yeah, I think that's something, like you make like a cowbell out of it.
A cowbell. I was gonna say a goose honk. Just like an elephant, like trumpet, like just any outrageous thing. I'm sure there's got to be something. There's got to be an animal that's regional that creates like an amazing honk. But yes, definitely email us at table4deuce@gmail.com. Let us know how we're doing. Let us know what you think of the poems, because that's really the important part, is talking about poetry and getting a discussion going. So let us know. And otherwise, we will talk to you all next time. So, toodles.
I brought to today's podcast.
We're just idiots online. It doesn't matter.
Not just the superficial aspects of it all. It's, ooh.
Oh, sorry about that. Got it.
Damn, I'm boring today. It's like,
I just log off. I'm done. Thanks. Just text me when you're done.